Good morning, distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning for our webinar series, Education and Research in the COVID-19 Era. My name is Fiona Morris and I am the Counsellor, Education and Science at the Australian High Commission in Malaysia. I work for the Australian Department of Education, Skills and Employment, and my office in the Australian High Commission is responsible for enhancing collaboration between Australia and Malaysia in the area of education and research. Our key partners here in Malaysia are the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Higher Education. It has been an honour for us to work with the Ministry of Higher Education to develop this series of 5 webinars on how the global pandemic has impacted education and research. It is my pleasure to introduce Australia's new High Commissioner to Malaysia, His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, and the Secretary General of the Ministry of Higher Education, Datuk Seri Dr. Mazlan Yusoff, who will be formally opening this bilateral webinar series. I will now hand over to His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, Australia's High Commissioner to Malaysia, to make some opening remarks. Thank you, Dr. Lee.
Thank you, Fiona. I hope everyone can hear me. Distinguished participants, academic colleagues from the Malaysian and Australian higher education sectors. Assalamu alaikum and salam sejahtera to you all. It's a great pleasure and an honour to be opening today's joint webinar series between Australia's Department of Education, Skills and Employment and the Malaysian Ministry of Higher Education, titled Education and Research in the COVID-19 Era. Of course, Australia and Malaysia share a long history of collaboration and partnership in education and research. We in Australia are privileged that many of Malaysia's current leaders in politics, business, civil society and academia have chosen to complete their university studies in Australia, including under the Colombo Plan, shaping the deep connections and people-to-people links between our two countries. Since 2002, over 125,000 Malaysians have studied in Australia, and many more in the decades before. And over 3,000 Australian students have chosen to study and intern in Malaysia under the new Colombo Plan since 2015. These alumni are a valuable asset for both of our countries. There are 4 Australian universities with a physical presence in Malaysia: Monash University, Swinburne University, Curtin University, and most recently the University of Wollongong. And they continue to build on 2 decades of collaboration with Malaysia on education and research. Many more Australian education providers have partnership and pathway arrangements with Malaysian education institutions, including at the Australian high school level or Australian matriculation, as I understand it's often called here in Malaysia. Education and research collaboration between Australia and Malaysia continues to strengthen through cooperation between Australia's Department of Education, Skills and Employment and Malaysia's Ministries of Education and Higher Education, and these webinars are a product of that collaboration. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an enormous impact on education and research globally, with education institutions at all levels, schools, polytechnics, community colleges and universities, having to adapt to online delivery models in a very short time frame. Educators and researchers everywhere have faced many challenges, but amid the difficulties, there have also been opportunities. This webinar series will provide a more detailed look at how Australian and Malaysian higher education institutions and polytechnics and community colleges have responded to the impact of COVID-19 over the last 18 months. The webinars will also outline the government frameworks in Australia and Malaysia, which ensure the quality of online education and the particular issues and opportunities which COVID-19 has presented for international research collaboration. I hope the ideas, solutions and policy developments outlined in this webinar series provide you with some inspiration and food for thought, and most importantly, encourage you to think of how Australia and Malaysia can continue to collaborate on education and research as we all continue to address our shared challenges together. Thank you, and it's now my great pleasure to introduce a video message from the Secretary General of the Ministry of Higher Education, Datuk Seri Dr. Mazlan Yusoff. Thank you very much.
His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, Australian High Commissioner to Malaysia, honorable speakers, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning to all of you. It is indeed a great honor for me to be here at the Malaysia-Australia Dialogue on Education and Research in the COVID-19 era webinar series. Praise be to Allah that we are still able to conduct programs like this in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we embrace the new normal, technologies have indeed brought us all closer together. I would also like to take this opportunity to welcome and congratulate the newly appointed Australian High Commissioner to Malaysia, His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee. I wish you selamat datang, and I have full confidence that you will carry out your duty above and beyond in ensuring that our relationship remains vibrant. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, Australia and Malaysia have established a relationship that is built on shared history, outstanding people-to-people links, and a solid bilateral cooperation since World War II. And this year marks the 66th year of Australia's diplomatic presence in Malaysia. I believe this long-standing friendship is due to the respect and understanding that we have for one and another, as well as the common interests that our countries share. One of them is in higher education field. We have always leveraged on our robust cooperation in the higher education sector, and I trust that we will further strengthen this relationship during your tenure in Malaysia. To reflect on the long-standing relationship that we have between Malaysia and Australia, Monash University opened its first foreign branch campus in Malaysia back in 1998. Since then, 3 more universities from Australia have established their campus in Malaysia, namely Curtin University and Swinburne University located in Sarawak, and the most recent is University of Wollongong in 2019. As we continue to advance our cooperation in the higher education sector, efforts to renew current Memorandum of Understanding in the field of higher education that will expire in November 2022 remains our common priority. Australia has always been one of the popular destinations for Malaysian students when choosing to study abroad. To date, there are more than 20,000 Malaysian students pursuing their tertiary education in Australia, and we certainly hope that we could also attract more Australians to pursue their higher education in Malaysia. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has affected the world in ways that have never been experienced before. Education is among those sectors that has faced the brunt along with many other sectors such as retail and tourism. However, as the saying goes, adaptability is the simple secret of survival, and in this age of disruption, technology needs to be utilized to its full potential. Henceforth, the idea of holding this webinar came about. This is one of the activities that we have planned with Australia for this year. The topics of this webinar have been carefully selected and crafted in a way that the intended discussions will be beneficial to the participants from both countries. As they say, every cloud has a silver lining. This pandemic has brought us closer today for us to deliberate on new paradigm to further strengthen the foundation of online learning in higher education. I am proud to acknowledge that we have selected a diverse group of panelists and moderators who are the experts in their respective fields. I was also made to understand that the Australian panelists have immeasurable experience working with Malaysian higher education institutions. Thus, I believe with their vast experience in higher education and also having been in Malaysia, the panelists would be able to provide insights that would benefit both countries. I'm looking forward to listening to their thoughts and ideas on how we can best address education and research in the post-pandemic era. I also believe that all the participants will leave this webinar with immense knowledge and experience that they would gain from the panelists. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, it is my fervent hope that this program will further strengthen bilateral relations between Malaysia and Australia. I believe that by working together and through the sharing of expertise, we can overcome any challenges brought upon us. Let us together use this seminar to provide a better future through education. And with that, I thank you.
Hello again, everyone. I would like to thank His Excellency Dr. Lee and Datuk Dr. Mazlan for opening today's webinar series. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. Our apologies for the sound issues, but it wouldn't be a COVID-19 webinar series without a few technical issues. Now that the opening formalities have concluded, I would like to introduce our moderator for our first webinar, which is called Quality Assurance in Online Higher Education in Australia and Malaysia. Our moderator for this session is Mr. Mohammed Zafir Mustafa, who is the Senior Director for Policy and Expertise Development in the Malaysian Qualifications Agency. Mr. Zafir is a quality assurance expert who joined the National Accreditation Board, MQA's predecessor organisation, in 1999. He has served as a quality assurance professional for almost 20 years in various roles and capabilities, including as Director of the Institutional Audit Division until 2017, and Director of Policy and Strategic Planning Division until 2019, when he was appointed to his current role as Senior Director for Policy and Expertise Development. Mr. Zafir will introduce our panelists today and will moderate the Q&A session. Welcome, Mr. Zafir.
Assalamualaikum, salam sejahtera, and a very good morning to all. Thank you, Fiona, for the introduction. I'm truly honored to be the moderator for this session. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, joining Fiona, I would like to welcome you all to the session 1 of the Education and Research in the COVID-19 era. This session will focus on quality assurance in online higher education in Australia. Joining us this morning to discuss on this important topic are 4 esteemed speakers, 2 from Malaysia and 2 from Australia. From Australia, we have Dr. Helen Neil, Director of Higher Education Integrity Unit of the Tertiary Education Quality and Standard Agency, or better known as TEQSA. We also have Professor Lynn Alderman, already on the screen, okay, the Dean for Academic Transformation, University of Southern Queensland. We also have Professor Khairul Saleh Muhammad Sahari, the CEO of MQA for Quality Assurance. And we have, last but not least, Professor Andy Liu Tikoi, already on the screen, Deputy Vice Chancellor of HAP University. Thank you for your time. Before we go further to the presentation, allow me to give some introductory remark. I wish to start with a positive statement saying that there has been a tremendous development, progression, and advancement on online learning, especially in Malaysia and also Australia. We must recognize on the expansion of open and distance learning over the years in terms of the numbers of providers as well as the numbers of programs. that offered in various level and field, which has given access to many learners to higher education and for them to acquire high qualification. There has been an exciting trend, especially for the last 5 years, on MOOC and micro-credential, which also have been leveraging on online platform to reach learners at global scale. Adding to that, whenever social distancing was imposed last year due to the pandemic, online arrangement, I think, seems to be almost the only option to get the learning continuous in many countries. All of this, as I view, signify growing acceptance, confidence, recognition, and quite recently, due to the pandemic, an unprecedented heavy reliance on online arrangement, education, and training. And I also view that these have been contributed, among others, by firstly, the endless effort taken by our passionate educators to improve, innovate, and improvise the quality of learning. And secondly, the significant role of our qualification system in providing trust and, of course, connecting them to the national qualification framework. I would like to stop there and let our speakers to deliberate further. Before that, the Q&A box is available on the screen. At any time, you can jot down your questions, and we're gonna address all the questions, as many as possible later. Ladies and gentlemen, let's begin with our first speaker, Dr. Helen Neil, already on the screen, the Director of Higher Education, Integrity Unit of TEQSA. She joined TEQSA in January 2021. She brings a wealth of experience to her current role, having worked for more than 20 years in Australia's higher education sector as a scientist, an academic, and also a quality assurance professional. Prior to her current appointment, Dr. Neil was the Senior Advisor for Quality and Standard at Monash University. Prior to that, a Senior Assessment Assessment Manager at TEQSA and an academic at the Australian National University. Dr. Neil will provide us with updates on quality assurance framework of online education in Australia. Dr. Neil, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you here today. I'm especially delighted to be part of anything to do with Malaysia, which is where I spent a lot of my childhood, in fact, and did the first 3 years of my schooling in a very small town called Bintulu. So it's always a delight to have anything to do with Malaysia. Just going to share my screen. Hopefully you'll be able to see the presentation. Is that visible? Great.
You can see your screen.
Wonderful. So yes, my substantive role is Director of the Higher Education Integrity Unit, but I'm also currently Acting Director of Policy Research and Engagement for the agency. So I see there's a really wide variety of people on the webinar, so I'd like to spend just a minute or two giving a very quick background to TEQSA and how the agency works, and then move on to talk about online learning. How do I advance the screen? There we go. So TEQSA is Australia's independent national regulator of higher education quality. We're about 10 years old now as a national agency. We have two key objectives in our Act, which is to protect and enhance Australia's reputation for quality higher education, but also to protect the interests of students. So essentially in Australia, higher education operates like a licensing scheme. You need to be registered as a higher education provider with TEQSA to offer any higher education either in or from Australia. So a big part of the regulatory work for the agency is in considering applications for registration, but also it's a renew cycle. So at a maximum, every 7 years, an institution needs to come forward again for re-registration. And if they're not a self-accrediting authority, TEQSA also has to accredit each individual course of study. So Australian universities all have self-accrediting authority, and so do a number of other providers. But for everyone else, they have to submit each course of study for approval by TEQSA before they can offer it. Additional regulatory worker compliance assessments. So where TEQSA becomes concerned that there is non-compliance with legislation or that there's a problem that might be impacting the quality of the education or the student experience, we can undertake a compliance assessment, and that can be targeted in whatever area we think needs investigation. Increasingly now, TEQSA is looking at thematic reviews of sector-wide issues, and in my substantive role as the Director of the Higher Education Integrity Unit, I'm leading that work for the agency. So about a year ago, the government decided to create this new integrity unit within TEQSA so that there would be a central part of the agency that could have that broad view across problems that impact all providers, not just a problem that might arise in an individual provider. So the way that TEQSA manages its regulatory business is based on the three principles that are in our Act, which is regulatory necessity, reflecting risk, and proportionate regulation. And this is with the aim to essentially recognise the autonomy of institutions and recognise that ultimately they are best placed to run their business and to deliver quality education. And we want to also allow for innovation and diversity in the sector. So when I say that courses and providers are regulated, they're regulated against this standard. So it's standards-based regulation, and we have something called the Higher Education Standards Framework. It was just recently refreshed to change the categories of providers. So we have 4 categories now: Australian University, Institute of Higher Education, and 2 of the other smaller university categories. So those standards are new and just came into effect, but most of the standards didn't change. So the standards that regulate the quality of education and the student experience remained unchanged. So the threshold standards apply to all courses at all locations, either in Australia or offshore, in all kinds of delivery arrangements, so whether they're a joint venture with another university or another provider, or whether they're being delivered via third-party arrangements. And crucially, for this conversation, they also apply to all modes of delivery. So in Australia, we have a uniform set of standards supported by institutional monitoring, enhancing quality for all modes of delivery. So we have not designed separate standards to cover online delivery. They fall under the existing framework for quality higher education. So of course, online learning around the world has dramatically increased during 2021 due to the pandemic. And Australian providers, like I'm sure providers around the world, had to grapple with this very urgent and immediate and comprehensive need to move their delivery online. And there were differences and challenges for organisations. So institutions were differentially experienced with this. We had some institutions that were very comfortable with distance education or with online delivery. We had other institutions for whom that had never been a part of their business model. So as an institution, there were differences in how ready they were to transition to online, but also within an institution, there was a wide difference in the experience of individual academics to teach online and to utilise that technology. The scale and the scalability of infrastructure for online delivery was very different. And of course, different providers had very different demographics of student populations. And those student populations had different comfort levels with technology and different compatibility of the home environment. You know, some students were studying at home with very poor internet. Some students were studying in shared houses with no quiet space. So there was a real range of experiences. And of course, students studying at home with small children running around or with other caring responsibilities. There were challenges depending on the types of course that delivered. So professional accreditation requirements, have been really difficult for providers to navigate for courses such as medicine or nursing, where there's a large practical component. So what we decided to do as an agency was to really try and support our providers to do this well, so that we could make sure that the students were getting the best possible education within the limited environment that we all found ourselves in. So the agency established an online learning good practice website, which is a repository of practical information to assist providers. And these resources are all free and publicly available to anyone. Just go to our website and you'll find them. So they're organised into categories. So this was at the start of the pandemic. So there were resources really targeted at beginners, just how to get started, how to think about the student experience, how to think about interacting, Assessment integrity, of course, has been a really big focal point for the agency, and I know for providers around the world. So some resources about trying to maintain the integrity of assessment in a fully online environment, some international perspectives for our Australian colleagues to learn from, and links to webinars, podcasts, and an expert advice hub. So the expert advice had really practical resources, and if you've never had a look at it, I'd encourage you to do so. There's some great things on there about designing assessment rubrics with online education in mind, authenticating online assessment, simple tips on how to improve a student's online experience, and also resources for students to help them navigate. We have a new download hub, as I mentioned. This is some work out of the Higher Education Integrity Unit, where we're really leading the work by the Australian government to try and stamp out contract cheating on the commercial companies that target students. We've made a download hub for students just to help them really understand the implications, understand how to know when it's a contract cheating company approaching them, and also some resources in there for academics and institutions as well. So the emerging issues that we've really noticed during the pandemic has been assessment and invigilation, of course, because, as I said, some institutions have never tried to do this before. The sophistication of contract cheating services, who've really sensed an opportunity with students feeling isolated and being fully online. Increasingly, we're hearing that it's not so much that students go looking, but that cheating companies harass them constantly online. The quality of the student experience has been a real consideration for TEQSA. The quality assurance of third-party delivery relationships is also really important. And increasingly now, as we move into the second year, the kind of just the induction of students. Some students have never actually been at a physical university now. You know, they've spent their entire career online. As I said, we're really pleased to be part of this conversation and for the ongoing global conversations. Online learning is really increasingly a global conversation. Students can study anywhere more than ever before when there's no visas to consider. The pandemic has seen education providers and quality assurance agencies really work together, and I think Australia has really done that quite well and tried to work with them. The expert resources were all created by people in the sector, so we've really helped to just link up the experts who've been doing this for a long time with their colleagues who weren't as experienced. I think the reality now is that the future capabilities of the educational technology will continue to drive the sector. We are in a period of change, and I'm not sure that it's ever going to go back to what we knew pre-COVID. And the quality of the student experience really needs to be reconsidered and reset with that consideration of an online learning environment and what that means. And just a quick shout out while I have you that we do have a fully virtual online conference this year, if anyone would like to know more about TEQSA. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Helen, for your sharing, and also congratulations for the new role. Okay, it's interesting that to know that you TEQSA have one standard to cover all conventional and also online, but also I think it's very helpful to understand your expectation on quality when you shared about your toolkit on good practices in online learning. And I think there are some similarities in terms of the arrangement of quality assurance that you are undertaken by TEQSA and with MQA. And I hope that that's also the time for us to move to our next speakers, Professor Dr. Khairul Saleh Muhammad Sahari. Prof, are you ready?
Yes, thank you.
Professor Khairul Saleh Muhammad Sahari, our second speaker, is currently the Deputy CEO of MQA since May 2019, responsible for quality assurance of the agency. Prior to the current appointment, he was the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic at University of Tenaga Nasional, an active assessor for accreditation of engineering program under the Board of Engineers Malaysia. He's a senior member of the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, and a chartered engineer registered with the Engineering Council United Kingdom. His research interest is in the area of robotic, mechatronic, artificial intelligence and control. Professor Khairul Saleh will provide us some update on the quality assurance of online learning in Malaysia. Professor Khairul Saleh, you may start your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Zafir. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning to all viewers and listeners out there. It's a privilege for me to be representing MQA today to just share on some of the things that we have with regards to online learning. So I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see the screen.
We can see the screen.
Okay, thank you.
Prof.
So I'm just going to, similar to Helen, what I'll do is I'm going to just briefly talk about MQA, and then we'll go to the online learning and with regards to COVID and what are the steps forward for us in Malaysia. So MQA, similar to TEQSA, is actually established under the Act. We have our MQA Act, and we were established in 2007. And similar to also TEQSA, we are also the sole agency in charge of accreditation, quality assurance of programs in higher education. And we also have, we also maintain the National Qualifications Register and also the framework itself. So at the moment, we have about 16,000 programs registered in MQR in terms of full accreditation. And out of the 16,000, roughly about 12,000 are active programs. And we have been collaborating with TEQSA since even before TEQSA was, established in 2011, EUQA at that point of time. So I think we have a good and a strong relationship with TEQSA. And with regards to online learning, this is where we are slightly different from TEQSA, where in Malaysia we have the general, what we call as the standard for program accreditation. We call it the Code of Practice for Program Accreditation, or in short, we call it COPA. COPA in general is for all types of programs, but for online open and distance learning, we have actually developed a separate standard, which we call as COPA ODL, which stands for Code of Practice for Program Accreditation, Open and Distance Learning. And this has been actually an evolution from originally guidelines to good practices back in 2011, upgraded to a Code of Practice in 2012, and we had the refined version 2 years ago in 2019. So the journey on ODL and on online learning has been quite, since 2011, and maybe prior to that as well. But in terms of development of the documents, we have been continuously working on improving the standards to actually guide the offering of ODL type programs. And based on the recent and the latest version of this guideline or the Code of Practice, it's actually developed based on the 7 areas, which is similar to the COPA that we have. It covers all elements from the program development, in terms of the body of knowledge, in terms of the learning outcomes. And then we have on the assessment side, the student selection, the support services, the academic staff, educational resources, which also includes the facilities and also the the budgeting, program management, and also the CQI, program monitoring and review. At the moment, we have 109 institutions offering ODL type programs in the country, totaling 336 active programs as of April 2021. Okay, and what is the significant difference between this Code of Practice on COPA ODL compared to the conventional is what actually constitutes ODL. What is the definition of ODL from Malaysia's perspective? By the way, you can download this document. It's accessible through this website, this link in MQA's website. So what actually is the criteria of ODL program in Malaysia? We are looking at the program level, 60%, more than 60% of the courses offered are conducted via open and distance learning. So this is the condition in which what does it mean by courses that is in ODL in nature? So at the course level, we look at the student learning time, which is the SLT. At least 80% of the SLT delivered must be through open and distance learning. So there's 2 tiers of how we define ODL program. So at the program level, okay, the number of courses has to be more than 60% offered through ODL. And at what defines a course to be ODL is 80% of the SLT must be in ODL form. So this is just an example of how we can actually calculate whether a course or a program is ODL in nature. Okay, so and ODL can also be offered through all levels in the MQF. We have level 1 until level 8. So we can actually, all higher education providers can actually offer ODL at all the levels in MQF. And the purpose of this COPA ODL, it serves many parties, namely, number one, we have the dedicated ODL higher education providers. Higher education providers which have been the license to offer dual mode, both conventional and ODL. And we also actually cater for conventional HEPs offering individual ODL programs, and also for those who are delivered, programs delivered with courses delivered through ODL. Okay, so this is actually to also support blended learning, which we allow institutions to mix and actually arrange their programs in terms of delivery to be blended up to 60% of the content of the program. And ODL is also promoting flexibility in terms of it can actually be arranged with other standards and other modalities as well. For example, in terms of the entry for ODL programs, we can actually allow open entry, appel through the recognition of prior learning. Okay, and in terms of credit transfer, we can also have ODL type programs to also go through credit transfer for MOOCs, through appel, credit transfer through recognition of prior learning, and the latest one we have appel Q as well. So all these can actually be linked to ODL. And it can actually be also in terms of programs on dual joint awards, double awards, okay, and it can also be linked to MOOCs, micro-credentials, and so on. And also ODL can also be linked to other types of modalities in terms of the delivery, such as the work-based learning, the industrial mode, apprenticeship, and so on. So ODL actually adds on to the flexibility of learning in terms of learning in the country, and hopefully all the higher education providers can actually leverage and actually mix and match and actually have a more flexible type of program offered across the country. And it also supports the Malaysian Education Blueprint, where we have the shift number 9, globalized online learning, and also shift number 3 on the nation of lifelong learners. And with regards to COVID-19, so I did explain that we have the COPA ODL, and actually all the programs offered by the country, by the higher education providers in the country must actually adhere to COPA ODL. But due to the pandemic COVID-19, we had no choice but to allow all the higher education providers to shift the modality to online learning. And we can see that in 1 month after the implementation of the so-called, at that point of time, movement control order back in March 2020, almost 95% of the institutions have already shifted to online learning. And by now, 100% of the institutions are running programs and in online mode, be it 100% or blended between online and also face-to-face learning. And MQA's response, we issued advisory notes, especially to notify and to advise the institutions on how to adjust the learning and the learning process, the delivery, the assessments, and so on, so that actually the key point here is that the quality must be intact, must be in place, must be adhered to the same standard, but the flexibility is given in terms of the delivery, in terms of the assessments, so that institutions and also students and also staff's welfare are well protected. And we also engage with professional bodies to ensure that they are also aligned with what we are also proposing to the higher education providers. And we have a list. So the latest one we just recently announced in 16th of August 2021. Okay, and the basic thing about the all these advisory notes is in terms of the guiding priorities is to support the government in fighting COVID-19, ensure the progression of learners, ensure quality for future career opportunity. And the guiding principles, it's actually to recognize this as a temporary measure in response to the crisis. And we are giving autonomy and accountability to the Senate Academic Board of the institutions, safeguard students' interests and staff's welfare, providers to keep proper records on academic adjustments. So we need all the HEPs to keep the records of the changes made during the pandemic. Okay, and this is also the role of the IQA, of the providers to arrange post-crisis interventions, including gradual remedial actions. And we will actually consider all of this in our audit visit to the institutions later on. And what is important in terms of all these advisory notes, as I mentioned earlier, so we see that the big framework is to actually ensure the welfare of students and staff, the progression, as well as to ensure that the students maintain high competitiveness in terms of employability in the industry. And we want to actually have also ensure that the quality quality of the programs offered remains intact so that we can have competent graduates. But we allow institutions to change the mode of delivery to online 100% if they want to. In terms of the arrangement of the student assessments, the grades itself, they can also have higher education providers can also modify the grading system to suit the needs of the current situation. We also allow the delivery to be made in a smaller bites in terms of micro-learning and micro-credential. And we also put emphasis on the IQA to play their role to monitor whatever changes and progress made by the institutions and the students. And moving forward, so what we have done after the pandemic and also recently is the fact that now, previously what happened was institutions who are not open and dual mode, they are not allowed to offer ODL type programs without having the same program in conventional mode first. But since December 2020, all institutions can now offer ODL programs without having the same program in conventional mode accredited first. So this is a boost to the institutions to offer new types of programs without having conventional mode to be offered first. And then flexibility in terms of what we have granted to the institutions during the pandemic. It is hoped that this flexibility allows HEPs to seriously consider programs in ODL after the pandemic is over. So they have now is as a test bed for them to actually test what are the types of programs they can actually offer online. And we hope that there will be more programs offered in the future with regards to ODL. Okay, that's all from me. Thank you very much. Back to you, Encik Zafir.
Thank you, Professor Khairul, for your sharing. I think you can understand not only that there's already standards for accreditation of online learning introduced by MQA. There is also new intervention specifically dealing with the COVID-19. I think we are a bit behind time. I think we can go to our third speaker, Professor Lynn Alderman. Professor Alderman is a higher education and evaluation expert with over 35 years of experience. She specializes in, I think the list is in process and impact evaluation, monitoring and evaluation framework for design, policy design and program conceptualization, and many more in my list. Okay. Professor Alderman is currently the Dean of Academic Transformation at the University of Southern Queensland, responsible in leading the development and implementation of university-wide initiative to strengthen education quality, learning and teaching, and the student performance. Professor Alderman was the inaugural Chief Evaluator for Australian Department of Social Services from 2017 to 2019. And last but not least, was awarded the prestigious L.H. Martin Institute Award for Excellence in Leadership in 2016. With that note, Professor Alderman, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm just sharing my screen.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
You can see that? All right.
Yes.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. I'm especially grateful for you inviting us to share our experience. I've just got a sort of snapshot of the overall where we sit as a regional university on the front screen, just to give you some background to the University of Southern Queensland. So we've demonstrated that we are a resilient university during this unusual time. And in some ways, it's due to the history of the university. The university has a very long history with distance learning. And then we became known for our capacity to deliver online learning. And of course, during COVID, when other universities were having to move into an online environment, the academics and the staff at our university are actually very comfortable in that space. And so we had the infrastructure, we had the capacity building and the staff and students. So there was a lot of foundations available to us so that we could respond in a really positive manner. So just from the 2020 annual report, we're a regional university. We have 26,000 students, 96% of them are domestic and 10% is international. And because of that footprint, we are fiscally sound and we did not have a huge negative financial impact during COVID. The other thing that we've been able to do is we've had an extremely positive feedback from our students during 2020 and 2021. And when the lockdown was declared in March 2020, we were surveying the students at the time when we closed the university and asked the students to work remotely. So we were able to capture the students' concerns immediately, and then we could code those comments and make sure we understood what was going on. What we have here is the academic quality framework that we brought in 2019. So this is a 3-year framework. And the idea was, I came in to work on this. So what can we do as a university to ensure that we understand how we're going, what the quality of the student experience is, and how are we going to address that over time? Now, we started with looking at all of the data that was available to us. So we looked at the data at a survey level, at a course, program, university and accreditation level. But these things take time. So the very first year was about systematic use of data. How can we find it? Where is it? Who's the responsible business owner? How can we get it into our data warehouse? And how can we use this? And then there's the capacity of helping academic professional staffs how to visualize and read the data. The second year is about embedding quality conversations. We wanted to make sure that the data was used right at the ground level. So we made sure that that was occurring by having conversations with course teams to say what's going on, what are the concerns that the students are providing to you. And this was held mid-semester so that we could actually intervene and address the students' concerns during the delivery and not wait till the end and just inform the next delivery. We actually wanted to respond to the students immediately while we had an opportunity to change their experience where possible. The year 3 is the year we're in now, which is about sustainability, succession planning, making sure we've got all of the regular reports. Now, this 3-year plan has been absorbed into an academic 3-year strategic plan that we now have at the university. But this was our original framework to get us started. And as I say, I can't say it enough, quality takes time. So this 3-year program is being delivered now. And now I'll unpack some of what that looks like. The quality assurance approach that we've taken has been informed by the work of Deming from the 1980s. And Deming's, sometimes we talk about continuous improvement, but Deming's original statement was that what we should be aiming for is a continuous improvement that leads to continuous learning. So this approach is quality, we're looking for quality and it takes time. And Deming was also interested in making sure that we maintain our results, but that we build ourselves and work into being a continuous learning organisation. Now, the work that I've undertaken in research is to actually break that down. It's not simply looking for continuous improvement, but we also need to spend time on looking at accountability, improvement, performance, and investment. So, for example, the University of Southern Queensland has invested in an academic quality unit and director, and there are 15 staff within there, and we set that up in 2019. So there is a very big investment. And then part of what those staff are tasked with is working on course enhancement conversations, whereby we work with faculty staff and the teaching staff to understand if the student experience is poor, what is it about the individual course makeup, the learning elements, the way it's delivered, what is it about that is causing some concern, and how can we provide wraparound services to improve that? Now, we are all obliged to have our accountability through our legislative requirements, through our own policies and procedures, and we often spend a lot of time looking at performance, but from my perspective, it's how much we invest in the improvement over time that will actually allow us to demonstrate that the student experience is improving as we deliver our curriculum. Now, this might look a bit busy, but when you unpack that, these are where the roles and responsibilities lie. So we're interested from the student surveys all the way through to the university. We have delegated responsibility. So who is the responsible officers involved in this activity? How are we monitoring it? What sort of data are we providing for them? What are the quality activities that the university has agreed to, and how would that actually enhance the student experience? For example, the course enhancement conversations that occur at the mid-semester are actually supported at the end of the semester, where the heads of schools hold the conversations, because that may lead to a performance conversation, which is actually more confidential and private, but it's backed up by policies and procedures. And as you can see, as we move from the student feedback and courses to majors and programs, there is different officers involved, different policy and procedure, and then we move all the way across to the university, and you can see our external regulators there, because that's where we're reporting against. If I just take this snapshot, and I know there's a lot of information on this screen, but what I'm really trying to show in this spectrum diagram, there were 45 course enhancement conversations held in semester 1, 2020, and they were held in week 6, which was April. And what we looked at is the student feedback was low on the scale of 3.5 or below, and we determined that if we looked at different variables, so for example, on this spectrum diagram, you have the class size, and then you have casual academics were involved in the teaching. This is postgraduate versus undergraduate. This is a pre-census withdrawal rate. This is whether there was an assessment hurdle, and then the final one was the government progression rate. Now, of those 45, not one course had the same profile as another. And some courses had none of these variables, except during the conversation, the course team agreed that there was an area of concern. Now, the reason I'm bringing this to your attention is we need to focus on the variability of quality at the delivery level. We can't assume that a single mechanism will support them. We certainly have brought about, at a university level, a significant resources to ensure that if there is, for some reason, a change in the teaching staff, what are the wraparound support services that we will bring to bear that will support the students in their experience. But again, we've conducted this activity for 6 semesters in a row, and we can see the improvement in the data. We can see the positive response from academic staff that this is a supportive activity, and we can demonstrate that the quality experience is improving. What I think is really important about COVID, it's almost a natural experiment. And as a university, we've taken this as an opportunity space. I think it's really important when you think about online learning. The assessment we had to move rapidly. Everybody did. Not all of our, although predominantly our teaching is online and our students are part-time, what we found is we did have a strong tradition of paper-based exams. Now, we couldn't use them in semester one, but what's interesting is we've taken the opportunity. We will not be supporting paper-based exams again at all. We've moved away from it completely. We've taken it as an opportunity to change what we do. So one of the things that the students really enjoyed, and they did enjoy the movement from exams to other types of assessment tasks, which were quite different. And they enjoyed the fact that some of the exams became take home, it might be 24 hours or 48 hours. They also really positively responded to the 24-hour help desk. When you're if you're a baker and you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and you want to do your exams before you go to work at 4 o'clock, it's important that you have a technology support person available to you. So the 24-hour a day help desk was a positive win. It took 21 cross-institutional teams to support the activity of moving all assessment in semester one into alternate assessment pieces or online exams. Now, I think one of the things that COVID has brought forward is that we can't do these things individually. It does take cross-institutional support, and it does take creative ways of responding to it. Now, the other thing that we've done is the university has invested in a range of ways to authenticate who is submitting an exam and when are they submitting it and from where. But the other thing that I think is important is that we have an obligation to make sure that when we design assessment tasks, that the assessment tasks encourage the students to contribute their individual responses that actually cannot be copied or be part of the contract cheating. The better we are at designing our assessment, the more honest and the more we will encourage the students and require them to authenticate their work as they go through. And I do think this should be embedded through everything we do at a university. The other thing that we did was, even though we were predominantly an online university, there were a number of students who did not have access to a laptop or internet connections that were reliant on our libraries. So it did require a significant investment. And I think that's where we can't assume that all students have access to the same equipment and the same infrastructure. And if they can't come on campus at all, we need to respond to that as well. The next thing, and really the final part of my talk, is about the teaching in a COVID era. Now, we've set 11 minimum requirements for all teaching staff to provide students with a quality learning experience. And that means, in one of them, it actually means that the students have access to their all of the pre-recorded lectures up front in week one. It's about thinking more about being distance learning and having all of the course content, everything prepared early and available to the students. So we have students who like to listen to all of the lectures right at the start of the semester. We are not going back to, sorry, I forgot to say, we have stopped mass class on-campus lectures and we will not be returning to those. So as a response to that, it's about having the online recorded lectures available to the students early in the week. Now, we would not be able to respond and be resilient if we did not have the history of distance learning and we were able to respond with a staff, an academic staff and a student body who did have the capacity to learn online. And we did have support services, a range of support services, as you can see, 21 cross-institutional teams who could do wraparound services to support our change. And what we've done is seize the opportunity space to say, we are not going to go back and support things like paper-based invigilated exams or mass lectures, because we don't think that's necessarily the way of the future. So we have taken the opportunity to change, and COVID has given us the opportunity to change for the future. So thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Professor Arman, for your sharing. I think I get your key message that online learning is a discipline and it requires the whole institution to get involved. That's the first thing. Not only the academics, the supports, the money and whatsoever. And I think I must agree that when you emphasize that during the COVID-19, the most challenging part is on the assessment. And I think I appreciate that you emphasize on that. Thank you very much. I think we can now have our fourth speakers. Professor Andy Lutikui. He is currently the Deputy Vice Chancellor of HAP University, overseeing the online teaching and learning, as well as internal quality assurance of the university. He has held senior position in several conventional and ODL institutions in Malaysia over the span of more than 25 years of his academic career. He is a senior assessor for MQ accreditation and was the chair to the committee, MQA committee, for the 2019 revision of the Code of Practice for ODL accreditation. He was the Secretary General for the ASEAN Institution of Open University from 2010 till 2012. Okay, just a little reminder before I am handing it over to Professor Andy. We have received a very good questions from the audience. We expect to receive more. Please feel free to jot down your whatever that your question or your comments in the Q&A chat. Please continue to do that. With that little note to our audience, I think that's the cue for you, Dr. Andy. Please.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Zafir, for your very generous introductory remarks. Now, just to check on some technical aspect here, is the slide visible, Mr. Zafir?
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Greetings, salam sejahtera, and a fabulous morning to our Honorable Datuk Seri Dr. Mazlan Yusoff, the Secretary General of MOHE in Malaysia, His Excellency Dr. Justin Lee, the Australian High Commission in Malaysia, distinguished speakers, colleagues, and of course, my fellow friends near and far. Now, it is always, or rather most of the time, will be a challenging journey, especially when you are scheduled as the last speaker for the session, as the memory bank of the participants or the audience would almost reach the saturation point. Nevertheless, I hope you have reserved some memory space for me to share with you some of the exciting good practices of the delivery of online during the pandemic from the perspective of a higher education institution in Malaysia. Now, colleagues, I believe, or I strongly believe, there are many common areas that we have put in place, whether it is within the Malaysia region or outside the Malaysia region, especially when we are looking at how to ensure a consistent delivery of higher education to our students during the pandemic time. Now, when we gaze at this picture, no one in the wildest dream would ever imagine that a life form of this average size of 120 nanometer has affected the lives of 7.8 billion people. This is where you would agree with me that in a way, COVID-19 is a blessing in disguise for us, particularly us in the education sector, because it has accelerated the digital disruption of higher education, where it practically transforms the conventional institution within inverted commas to a full-fledged online institution. Now, every one of us here has a story to relate, and my story covers 4 broad aspects this morning. I will be sharing with you briefly the birth of HELP University as a conventional institution, which has undergone various phases of digitalization even before the arrival of COVID pandemic in 2020. The second part, of course, looking at what are the guiding forces that help us to have this paradigm shift to fully online learning during the COVID pandemic. And of course, post-pandemic, there will be more elements of online learning. The third part, obviously, would be looking at what are the elements or factors that we have to put in place to ensure we have a bountiful harvest of the online learning. And last but not least, way forward for institutions. Particularly, we are referring to institutions who are classified as traditional conventional institution to fully embark on online learning. Now, just a very brief account of HELP University. From the modest root in 1986, HELP University has grown to provide quality education, not only at the tertiary level, but at the early childhood and K-12 level. And as you can see in the slide here, there are these gentlemen and women behind, and these are the people, these are the two souls behind the establishment of the institution, Datuk Paul and Datin Loh. They are the co-founder and still serve as the vice chancellor and group CEO even in their golden years. Now, incidentally, Datuk Paul is also a member, has been a member of TEQSA and MQA Council before. Now, their passion and mission is to ensure the university serves its purpose to the people, not only to Malaysia, but globally, to live a life of significance through education. It is on this note that when the COVID pandemic hit us in Malaysia, or rather globally, we were in a way prepared. In a way, we were prepared because we have actually begun our transformation plan long before the pandemic, looking at the digitalization of the university. So when we actually roll out the digitalization of the university, in a nutshell, we focus on three broad areas. Because these three broad areas to us, the three main broad areas, of course, there are other areas that may string along, but to put them under these three broad umbrellas, the focus would need to be on culture, talents, and technology. So in order to ensure a proper delivery of online teaching and learning, culture, talents, and technology plays a critical role in HELP University, or I would say in other institutions across the globe as well. Now, the transformation and paradigm shift to online learning that we have adopted is actually guided by the mantras and standards that are embedded in the four main forces that that are reflected in the slide here. Of course, the first two, the 1 and 2, are the internal forces within Malaysia that drive online learning, the primary forces. And the third and fourth, which all of us are very, very familiar with, the Sustainable Development Goal under the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development by the United Nations, and of course, the Fourth Industrial Revolution. So these are the four main pillars that were guiding us even before the pandemic hit us, in helping us to digitalize the transformation of the university, looking at the provision of a blended learning approach, as well as focusing on the aspects of online learning. Now, at this juncture, perhaps it's good for us to pause for a moment and ask ourselves these simple questions, just two simple questions. What are the multiple drawbacks to online education in comparison to traditional classroom setup? I repeat, What are the drawbacks? And I strongly believe as well, we have gone through this almost like 1.5 years. We know what are the drawbacks, we know what are the challenges. So knowing the challenges would then allow us to see how do we overcome that. So this is where the second question that we'll probably ask ourselves would be, what are the conditions or factors that will impact significantly or would have significant impact on the quality and success of online learning? Now, bearing in mind, technological requirements is definitely a must because it is entirely online. Now, by filtering answers to these questions, we can then cluster the critical success factors for online learning into three major categories. What we are seeing in this slide is the first category. And the first category is related to quality support services, the provision of quality support services. And for this, the quality support services must be integrated with the pedagogical aspects of online learning and delivery. You may ask me, Andy, what exactly are you trying to share here? What is actually in the area of quality support services? Basically, these are all administrative conditions covering the various stages of the learning cycles of a student. As you can see from the pre-enrollment right up to the completion and graduation. Now, in the interest of time, and definitely we don't have the luxury of time on our side, I would probably share the gist rather than going into the standards and criteria related to all these critical success factors. We would love to share with you probably in other forum. Now, moving on to the second cluster of the critical success factors. Health University is actually guided by this pedagogical related factors. As you can see in this slide, there are 5 major constructs. So when we brave the storm of this COVID pandemic in 2020 and even now, these were the 5 constructs that we occasionally or constantly review from time to time, because to us, these help us to build the resilience to survive. Now here, it is not only about survival, but keeping online learning at the leading edge. Just very, very quickly, let me run through with you the 5 constructs here in probably some of the salient points. Now, under the teaching methodology, this is where we got to balance the study life of a student, meaning we need to look at how to combine the synchronous and asynchronous teaching and learning activities. And of course, when we look at those things, the domains or the criteria, the standards, and the quality indicators will be infused into these 5 areas. Now, the second one is the adoption of technology. Now, appropriate technology is a moving target. We know it is constantly evolving. So therefore, as a higher education institution, we must move fast enough and be aware of the moving technology edge. Use the trailing technology edge, such as the AI, the augmented reality, virtual reality, and machine learning to create this form of learning. And I'm very, very sure all of us here are very familiar with these 3 terminologies: independent, interactive, and immersive learning. So when we are looking at online learning, majority of the learning would happen based on the initiative of the students. So this is where we need to make sure, how do we promote independent interaction and immersive learning when we are using the various technologies that are available.
Sorry,
And
Andy.
yes, sir.
I think we still you have 2 minutes to go.
Okay, sure. I will speed up. So there are other aspects like student engagement, student workload, and student assessment. And student assessment is what you have heard of colleagues telling us about the alternative online modality of assessment. Now, in the capacity building, and we know perfectly well that this is a vital role to improve the ability, skills, and expertise of teachers to perform their online learning. And these are the 4 main areas that we are looking at capacity building. Now, on the other side of the fence, I would like to remind colleagues, learners have to be also inducted and exposed to the various learning support services of online and its expectation as well. Otherwise, you may have the best teachers, the best pedagogical approach, but if the students or the learners are unable to fully utilize it, it will turn into a white elephant. So in conclusion, the way forward would be what we are listing here in the 5 elements here. And there is no doubt anymore, the adoption of online learning will continue to persist post-pandemic. And this shift would impact the worldwide education market. However, we understand there are challenges to overcome. We have to brave the storm to fully immerse into these 5 areas that we mentioned. Now, obviously for number 1 and 2, there will be greater demand for online component in the conventional courses, meaning the physical interaction, on-site interaction would be very minimal, relying mostly on online. And there are cases whereby there will be, or rather the institution would be exploring completely fully online courses. And the next one is definitely we have to blend the independent and interactive learning elements in the design, development, and delivery. Now, the third would be the immersive learning. HEP, or rather the higher education provider, must institutionalize innovation. And this is about creating immersive learning and a robust smart learning environment. The other areas, the second but last, would be leveraging on the nebulous content in the OER repository to promote collaborative learning. At the end of the day, it is all about education for everyone. Lastly, the pandemic has greatly increased the public interest in online learning. Therefore, the demand for short courses like micro-credential at the earliest should be at the forefront to meet the escalating demand. My parting remarks, or rather, I will leave you with these 3 inspiring core values of Help University, keeping in mind these core values, and I assure you we will thrive in online learning. The first is have the courage to innovate. Second, sharing the success by promoting collaborative learning and leadership. And finally, be significant, democratize access to higher education for all, open to people, places, methods, and ideas. With that, thank you very much. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay connected.
Thank
Over
you,
to
Dr.
you.
Andy.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Andy. Thank you all, our 4 speakers. I think we should go straight because to the Q&A session, and I would like to invite all our speakers to be on the screen. There's a lot of good questions. I think I would like to go for a more generic one first, and later on might be a few, we have opportunities. We can go for a very specific questions to might be to MQA and also to TEQSA. I think there's several questions repeating. One is about the challenge of substituting a practical component of teaching and learning. And specifically, as you mentioned, that there's a difficulty in terms of converting online learning for clinical, might be clinical activities. Maybe Professor Alderman or Andy, can you provide your view on this?
Certainly. So at the University of Southern Queensland, what we did is the clinicals were sort of stored until we were out of lockdown. There are some things that are not replaceable. We found, so where it comes to the external professional registration, education, nursing, we found that you can't actually substitute them online. We found that they had to be held. So unless there's a sort of a negotiation with your external registering body about how it's going to be dealt with in the future, we sort of did a workaround by keeping the student engaged with the subject, and when we were able to conducting the practical clinical placements then. So that's not a long-term answer, but that was the short-term response.
Okay. Do you want to add, Andy, on might be not on clinical, but any other form of practical activities?
Yeah, I think that there are two things that we have to be mindful here. We are subjected to two regulatory bodies actually. If a program is under the professional accreditation body, then it is governed by the requirements of the professional bodies. At the same time, we also have to fulfill the requirements of our internal, or rather the regulatory body of MQA. There are certain courses that we have substituted, or where the MQA has granted us the flexibility, instead of having internship of on-site practicum, the institution can actually transform this into a project or into a research studies. So this is where we have leveraged on this flexibility given to us. But at the end of the day, I think what is important is whatever methodology that we use to substitute the on-site presence, let's say we are talking about teaching practicum or industrial training, is that we have to go back to the course itself. We have to go back to the subject itself, looking at what do we intend to achieve. That means the learning outcomes prescribed in the course. If the methods that we propose is reliable and valid and able to ensure the achievement of those outcomes, then I would think the regulatory body would have no qualms in accepting those different methods.
Thank you, Andy. I think there's a good question posed by Boon Sang about leadership. Just want to get it to read it, share to the panel. Okay. Boon Sang would like to know if the panel could share what are the leadership role and function at different level in supporting online learning, and their quality assurance procedures, addressing uncertainties, unfamiliarities, and perhaps suspicious on this description. That's basically, maybe Helen, we want to share on this?
Sure.
On leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think the institutional leadership is really important. We see that, you know, in all organisations, when it flows down from the leadership, that there's a really clear rationale for why it's important, why it needs to be embraced, but then also the support, so that the leadership's actually making sure that the practitioners who are at the coalface have everything they need to make it successful. And then I think that's really the role that they play.
Professor Harold, you want to? Or Andy?
Zafir, sorry. Probably when we look at leadership, it is actually a top-down commitment. So if there is commitment, there must be also commitment of the support or the resources that will be allocated to ensure whatever methods or delivery or rather new initiatives can be executed successfully along the different reporting line from top to the ground level. Commitment and resources is definitely important, and definitely the other thing would be policies. There must be an overarching policy, because these would be the guiding principles to drive the entire institution. if we miss out this aspect, then each or different departments may have their own thinking, their own policies, and everyone will be going in different directions. So these, I think, is a critical area that an institution would have to look at.
Professor Alderman, you want to offer
Yes.
your insight on this?
If I could just add around the academic integrity area. So we have a dedicated staff. We also have dedicated staff out in the faculties. But I can't emphasize enough that if we pursue the educational side, rather than putting all our resources into the negative, let's go catch everybody, we need to be vigilant. We need to understand where contract cheating is occurring. But we also need to do the capacity building for the staff and students to understand the opportunities that there are for them to actually acknowledge their copyright, their intellectual property and their ownership. And if we put the value there, then there is it continues to reduce the opportunities that are available to the students. We can also enhance their respect of integrity and the qualifications that they come out with. So I think there's the leadership, but there's also the educational capacity building opportunity that we really need to invest in to make sure that our students understand exactly what we value for them and for their outcomes.
Thank you, Professor Alderman. Professor Hairul?
I think all the good points have been mentioned by the panels. Maybe what I would like to add on will be on with regards to definitely, for example, COVID-19. So there has been a lot of flexibilities provided by MQA and the ministry, for example. So I think the leaders have to be very alert about what are the the things that they are allowable at this point of time, at juncture. And then not only focusing on the institutions, some of the initiatives or the flexibilities given are to share resources among these institutions. So I think it's also important for the leaders to be talking to not within their institutions only, but also to the regional level, at the community level, and how to actually help the students, not only their students, but students in general, to actually be able to continue with the studies. I think that is also important for us to highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hairul. I think there's one question specifically for TEQSA. It's from Shasha Ahmad Sebi. She wants to know about what are some of qualification methods used to ensure third-party providers adhere to. How do you classify third-party providers? Do TEQSA only oversees higher education or sector, or include other education providers such as language center? Helen?
Yes, thanks for the question. So third-party arrangements encompasses anything where a provider is getting another party to deliver some or all of the award. So it does include things like placements, but they are also covered under work integrated learning. So we more tend to think about, for example, we see it a lot offshore, where you might have someone delivering your course in another country, or you might have someone delivering English language courses. TEQSA does have regulatory authority for ELICOS courses. Those are the intensive English language courses that lead into a higher education award, and also for foundation and pathway programs. So look, quality assurance of third-party arrangements, really there's 4 crucial pillars. I would say the first is that there's a formal and detailed agreement, a written agreement between the main provider and the person delivering the education on their behalf, that clearly sets out what the responsibilities are. The primary provider, the provider that is registered with TEQSA, always maintains the responsibility for the quality of that award, so they can't contract that out, if you like. So the primary provider is always accountable. And then there needs to be really clear information for students. That's crucial, that students understand that they are still a student of the primary provider, so that they know that if they have a complaint or if something goes wrong, they actually know how to seek support and how to solve that problem. And then it really comes down to the institutional governance, accountability and monitoring. So as the primary provider who's responsible, what are the kind of data sources that you're looking at, and what's the aggregation and reporting of data that would allow you to identify a problem and fix it?
Thank you, Helen. I think, to be fair, we need to get a few questions directed to Prof. Hairul for MQA. Okay, this is also from Shasha Ahmad Sebi. Okay, does MQ recognize or accredit international e-proctoring or online assessment examination as well as example CEFR English proficiency test? Is MQA only for course higher education or include education providers in private sector? Can MQA certify or assist in accreditation of courses in the private education sector? All right, Prof. Harold, you want to give your input on this?
Yeah, okay, thank you. First, maybe to answer about the role of MQA. MQA is actually, we are not only looking at private, we also look at all the higher education providers providing programs at the tertiary level. So this includes public, private institutions, and also all other providers out there. I mean, who can actually deliver programs of tertiary level programs. And then in terms of what we do in terms of certification and recognition of maybe professional programs, for example, ACCA, so of UK. So what we do is we also quality assure these kind of programs, and we compare them against our framework, the National Qualifications Framework, to see the credit bearing, the level of offering, whether it's at bachelor level and so on. So then once this is actually endorsed by MQA, the providers can actually offer, for example, ACCA type programs in the country. Okay, and that can also go under the accreditation of MQA. But when we talk about English language programs, they are not linked to the framework specifically, so it's not the jurisdiction of MQA to actually accredit or quality assure CAFR maybe alignment of these English language programs. But we do work closely with the Ministry of Higher Education in determining what are the English courses recognized at the moment to be offered by the providers with regards to the alignment to CAFR. So we work closely with the ministry as well as the experts in language to identify the suitability of the English courses offered in the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Harold. I think if I may suggest, this will be the last question, but I'm going to be generic. I captured a sentiment that firstly, there's some comments saying that whether the approach now that we are a bit delaying in terms of fitting, there's element of, I think in UK, they say that's about compassionate quality assurance and accreditation. Would that basically affect the students? And I think it's also highlighted by one of our audience saying that how are we going to convince the employers? Maybe Andy, you want to start with that? Andy, you are muted.
Sorry, Zafir. You just highlighted one very important aspect of the human values, compassion. When we recruit a student, I think it is the onus or responsibility of the institution, even if, let's say, the person may not be an excellent student, all right, may not be the cream de la creme, but may have met the minimum requirements. So it is the onus of the institution to ensure we bring the student up to the level. That means we have to make sure they exit with the relevant exit standards. And when we say compassion, as you mentioned just now, compassion here is more of looking at how to humanize some of the courses. That means bringing in the elements of compassion in terms of the spread of the learning support services. So what we are focusing here, I think we have to give emphasis on student engagement, because when you engage with the learners, this is where the learners will feel motivated. The learners will then see there is a purpose, there is a value in whatever the person is pursuing. That would be some brief remarks from me, Zafir.
How about Professor Alderman? How to convince the employers?
I think it's the whole framework. It's everything we do, and it's about standards but it's also about trust.
Yes.
So there has to be a trusting relationship between employers, the government regulators, the higher education institutions, and the students that engage in those. I mean, with that trusting relationship, I mean, that's why, you know, from time to time, our framework is updated, some of the things are refreshed to keep us contemporary. And I think as long as we remain contemporary, I think the COVID test for higher education internationally has been extremely, testing is just using the same test word again, but it's offered higher education an opportunity to excel. And I think that's the opportunity, because we need to, not only do we need to respond now, but we also need to respond in the future to those students who have had disrupted schooling.
Yes.
But those disrupted schooling students will actually come in probably better prepared for online learning than some of our current students. So I think we always need to have that, build the trust with our stakeholders and our relationships, maintain our standards, and continue to seek those opportunity spaces where we can excel as a sector.
Yes, I think I agree with you. There should be continuous engagement. And what we should say to them is everybody is doing their best. Professor Khairul?
With regards to the employer?
Might be the employer, or the way that now people seems to be skeptical in the way that quality assurance agencies handling their quality assurance at this moment because of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think, from MQA's perspective, because our accreditation is more or less perpetual in nature, although we similar to maybe TEQSA, what we are doing is we have the compliance audit every 5 years. And as mentioned also in my presentation, that through the advisory note, whatever changes made by the institutions has to be properly recorded and things like that. So we hope that these in a way be able to mitigate some of the issues, of course, concerns by the public, by the employers. And we also see that from the statistics from the ministry, that in terms of the employability, there's not so much of differences in terms of the rating when we compare 2020 and 2019, for example. So maybe the impact, we need to further look at this from longer term perspective. But we believe that through continuous engagement with the institutions and through with the employers and also the industries, we hope to be able to mitigate majority of these issues. Thank you.
Zafir, may I add, Zafir?
Yes.
Just a quick one. I think this is where we can learn from the open distance learning institutions. Now, when they emerged probably a decade ago, there is also this skepticism from the employer that they are saying the online open distance learning degree is substandard compared to the conventional. But what we are seeing right now, the acceptance and recognition of the employers on the open distance learning degree has escalated to a level that they have not expected it, let's say somebody in 100 years ago. So I think the same wave is coming back, but this wave is actually hitting the traditional track. So it is good, I think, we look at how to convince them that we are still following the same exit standards, same standards that we have employed, except the delivery and the approach are slightly different because of the advancement of, or the advent of technology.
Thank you, Andy. Helen, you want to add?
All great comments, only to say that for institutions to just keep listening to their students and their staff and their stakeholders and acting on what they hear.
Thank you very much. I think, ladies and gentlemen, with the last question discussed and answered, we are already at the end of the session. I trust that the sharing and exchanges of this session has provided us with a better understanding on the quality assurance of online learning in higher education, both in Australia and Malaysia. As we recognize, there are a lot of opportunities to further improvise and innovate of online learning. I also of the view that quality assurance framework in higher education must also continue to play an important role to stimulate and promote the improvement and innovation. With that note, thank you to everyone who have joined and stayed with us till the end of the session. Thank you to Dr. Neil, Professor Khairul, Professor Alderman, and Professor Andy for sharing your insight and expertise. Till we meet again in other occasion. Have a nice day. Stay safe, stay healthy. Goodbye and Assalamualaikum.
Bye, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.